Eve.
It's our pleasure to welcome now Chris Towner, Policy Director for the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget. Hey, Chris, good to see you. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on.
So I have been a regular subscriber to your newsletters and peruse your website. Lots of great talking points, pieces, narratives, analyses. But the big problem we face in this country that doesn't seem to garner the attention, I think, that is warranted, is that we just eclipsed the $38 trillion of debt mark. And I don't really see any slowdown to it, Chris. I've talked about this on the program many times. We've seen the Doge team come in and do a lot of cutting and make a lot of recommendations and proposals. But when you look at this continuing resolution, for example, which would fund the government, the discretionary functions of government, there's been some talk, as you know, in the Congress about we need to return to the pre-COVID levels of spending. But according to my math, this continuing resolution is about $500 billion more than the pre-COVID level, almost 30%. An increase in a short 6 years. What's your take on all this?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're going to see the debt just continue to go up over the next decades, especially as we have a $2 trillion deficit. We spend about $7 trillion a year, and we take in about $5 trillion in revenue, and that's a huge deficit, and we're going to keep accruing all of that. Now, some of the reason why we're spending so much is because of inflation. A lot of programs in the federal budget are adjusted for inflation, so we've seen prices raise about 25% over the last few years. So that's part of the reason why spending is going up. But also, Congress and lawmakers are just not really doing anything about the big drivers of our debt, which are mostly mandatory spending programs.
Right.
That's things like Social Security and Medicare.
Yeah. They don't seem to have any appetite to touch those programs. As you know, it's called the third rail of politics. It's a political liability to even bring the programs up unless you say we're absolutely 100% going to keep them just where they are. And, of course, okay, well, then that means we're going to keep producing $2 trillion deficits. I don't see any end in sight to it. And there have been lots of ideas that have been floated about how to address the trajectory of Social Security and Medicare. Your organization has done that as well. But I just don't see any serious uptake of that from our Congress.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is, though, that Congress is going to have to do something. In just 7 years, the trust funds that fund those programs will be totally out of reserves. So that means that new benefits and benefit payments will be limited to the revenues that are coming into the program. And that's about 75% of the promised payments. So seniors in 2032 will suddenly see their Social Security checks cut by a quarter if there's nothing done to prevent that from happening. So Congress is going to have to do something pretty quickly at that point. And honestly, they should have started to do it a long time ago, so we could have started phasing in those changes and making it more sustainable.
Chris, why do you think that's not getting more attention? Why is that not considered the three-alarm fire that it really is? That 7 years isn't that long away, and especially when you think in terms of congressional classes, and you've got senators that are in office right now that are going to still be in office when we're talking about this, right, or right on the edge of it, and you've got members of the House as well that are likely to continue to run for another 3 cycles. That's not unusual, serving 2-year terms. This is going to be falling right on their plate, but they're not saying anything today.
Yeah, I think that's an unfortunate reality of our current situation. The longer that we don't talk about this, the harder the problem gets to fix in easier ways, right? We can start phasing in those changes now, but the total lack of political leadership on this issue, and this isn't a partisan issue, it's the same on the right and the left. No one wants to talk about these very steep funding cliffs that will present some really, tough trade-offs in just a few years. I mean, you're exactly right. In 2026, what we'll see is the first class of senators that will absolutely be in office when this exhaustion happens, and they're going to have to do something about it. And we're trying to, get people to start talking about this. We need our politicians to be telling us the truth about this issue.
Yeah, and of course, as you know, most of the time there's not a lot of turnover, especially in the U.S. Senate, serving 6-year terms. So the vast majority of those that are sitting in the Senate right now are going to be in the Senate, I dare say, when this thing comes to a head, and they're going to have to take some sort of action. What are you guys recommending to address the coming insolvency of both the Social Security and Medicare's trust funds, which is kind of the reserves that we use to make up the deficit of revenue that we have relative to the payments, the expenses going out? We tap those trust funds to make ends meet. And Chris, if I'm not mistaken, with respect to Medicare, we're actually using general fund revenues to make up some of that shortfall as well. Is that right?
Yeah, so Medicare is a little bit more confusing because it has two different trust funds. One of them is for hospital payments. That's the one that will be exhausted in 2032. And then there's one that's fully funded by general revenues. So that one is running quite a bit of a deficit, but it doesn't matter as much because there is less of an accounting mechanism that will stop it from running that deficit. I mean, it certainly matters. It's contributing a lot to our federal borrowing, but it doesn't present the kind of tough trade-offs that both Social Security and Medicare hospital insurance exhaustion will present in 2032. We at the committee have just put out a bunch of ideas that we're calling novel solutions for the trust funds. It's our Trust Fund Solutions Initiative. There are ways that you can tackle it on both ends. Folks don't like to talk too much about revenues, but there are ways that we can increase revenue into the programs that doesn't necessarily increase people's taxes. So one idea we've come up with is called the employer compensation tax, and it says that 6.2% tax that employers pay into Social Security on behalf of the employee. That what if we covered all of the compensation that they're offering? So that includes like things like fringe benefits, stock options, everything. And that could raise a ton of revenue and really save the program from exhaustion. On the benefit side, last week we heard from the Social Security Administration that they announced the new cost of living adjustment. Well, maybe we can start means testing that cost of living adjustment a little bit and saying, the folks that are making the most well off, who some of which are collecting $100,000 in benefits, maybe they don't need a 3% increase in their benefits on an annual basis. Like maybe we could cut that into some sort of cap that they're still getting some increase, but maybe not getting the full increase that would be tied to their benefit. But that's just a couple of ideas. We'll be releasing a lot more solutions over the next year.
I've read the announcement, I guess, the proposal for the ECT, the employer compensation tax. So I can't recall, though, of course, covering all forms of compensation, such as stock grants and other expenses and other forms of pay that's part of the overall compensation package. But what about lifting the cap? That's the Democrats' favorite refrain is scrap the cap, making all just plain old wages and salaries subject to Social Security and let's talk about Social Security. Social Security taxes, both on the employer and the employee side, is what they want to do. Where does the committee stand on that?
Well, so we're in favor of any option that adds more revenue into the system or pares back benefits so that it's more sustainable. There are a few issues with just raising the cap. One is that our benefits are currently tied to how much we pay in taxes. So if we raise the cap to say one of the most popular proposals is to raise it up to 400,000 or above $400,000 of income. If we credit benefits along with that, it doesn't really improve the situation very much. And most of our history, we've seen that this program, the taxes are collected or connected to the benefit payments. So if we unconnect that, then maybe the program doesn't have as much support anymore, and it's really turning more into an anti-poverty program. Some people are in favor of that, some people are against that, but ultimately it doesn't solve too much. Another issue with raising that cap is that in some ways it's just stealing the revenue that we get for the rest of the federal budget. away from that part of the federal budget, right? So it's taking general revenues away, because if we raise payroll taxes, well, then people are going to collect less in income. So it's kind of just an accounting trick to throw money different ways.
Yeah, that's a good point. We're up against a break right now, but if you can hang around with us, we'll continue this discussion. You good?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, awesome. We got Chris Towner, Policy Director, Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget on the line. We're coming right back. We've got Chris Towner, Policy Director, Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget. So, Chris, to further dig into this, does your organization, do you talk to, do you communicate directly with lawmakers in Congress and call their attention to all of these details, all of these facts, all of these realities, and then also make some of these proposals to them to see if you can get some sort of traction with the lawmakers to make some changes?
Yeah, we definitely do. I will say I've been at the organization for a little over 10 years now. When I first started, there was a lot more interest in talking about Social Security. I think the political winds changed a bit, especially I thought one of the most interesting things about the 2020 presidential election was that both major candidates did not really want to talk about how to fix Social Security. They just wanted to talk
Right,
about not touching it. Right.
right.
So yeah, we do talk to a lot of staff on Capitol Hill when they're here. Obviously, the government's still shut down right now, so we're having a little bit of trouble doing that. But the staff are definitely really interested and engaged on it. We're just not getting as much traction as we hope. So we're going to continue to keep pushing for these kind of things, because the reality is we just don't have that much time left to deal with it.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the time is upon us, and it is compressing, and it's plowing ahead at a rapid rate of speed. 7 years will be here, and all the reports I've seen indicate that without action, it doesn't mean the whole thing's broke. It just means that the programs would only be able to satisfy like 3/4 of their obligations, something in that range, and that would be devastating to those who are honestly don't even know this is going on. As you know, most of our Social Security recipients probably aren't aware that if there's no action and they're still with us and receiving Social Security benefits, that without that action, their check's going to fall by about 25% from 1 month to the next, when we literally run out of money and the trust funding can't cover the shortfall between the amount we take in from wage earners and the amount we pay out to recipients. I don't think most people know.
Yeah, no, I think you're totally right about that. I think that there's just been a lot of burying our heads in the sand on this. And frankly, it's not only just the politicians who refuse to talk about it. Some of the interest groups that, represent seniors, there's a really big one that I won't
Mm.
name, but a lot of people are familiar with it.
Mm-hmm.
Like to say, Congress, don't touch Social Security, don't touch Medicare. We can't do anything about that. But what they're hoping and praying is that, when we do get to that exhaustion point, that we just, paper over it, probably with more borrowing, frankly. And that is just a totally unsustainable way of doing things. Our debt is already equal to the size of the economy. And in just a few years, we're going to surpass the record we saw after World War II. And it's just going to keep going up past that. But if we were to fix our Social Security and Medicare problems, we'd be fixing roughly half to a third to a half of the fiscal problems that we have, which is a lot of progress.
Yeah, no doubt. And to your point, since World War II, we're talking about the GDP ratio of our debt to GDP, not the total amount, obviously, of outstanding debt. But yeah, we were sunk with a lot of debt from the war, honestly, and we were paying that back, and we were trying to get our economy rolling again to get our GDP up. So something else that I've researched, just got curious. There's always this narrative promoted from our friends on the right that say, hey, look, we're going to grow our way out of this $2 trillion deficit with these fiscal policies that will boost our GDP. And that, of course, means more money flowing into the Treasury. And that's how we're going to offset these deficits and trim them down and start hopefully reducing, not necessarily eliminating and paying the debt, but reducing the amount we add to the debt. So my research indicated, however, Chris, that the percentage of GDP that we collect in tax revenue has been remarkably constant throughout the decades, no matter what the tax rates are. It comes in at about 17% of GDP. So the folks on the left say, we just need to raise the tax rates like crazy. Well, you're still probably going to get 17% of GDP. It kind of harkens you back to the old Laffer curve of what's the optimum point at which our tax rate should be to produce enough revenue to hopefully to operate the government, but not so intrusive and onerous so as to negate GDP growth. I guess I'm saying all this to say I don't see how we're going to grow our way out of this.
Yeah, I mean, growing our way out of this is very much wishful thinking. Like, obviously, economic growth would be really great for our fiscal situation, and we should do everything we can to try to get as much economic growth as we can, right? But the reality is that we're not going to see the days of growing like we were in the 1990s of over 3% annually. We're looking at closer to 2%, maybe a little bit less than 2%, and a lot of that is just a function of our demographics. We just have a lot older people who are getting out of the workforce, and we're not replacing them at the rate that we were back after the baby boomer and everything. So the reality is that yes, you can raise revenue a bit. The last time we had a balanced budget, revenues were about 20% of GDP. But remember, that also means that spending was about 20% of GDP as well. Spending is right now about 23% of GDP. So it's a very big difference. 1 or 2 percentage points of GDP is a very large amount. A lot of other countries collect a lot more revenue than we do, but they also have a lot slower economic growth. So there's trade-offs involved in everything.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just a point that I feel like is worth making, that I'm not sure we could do 4 or 5% GDP. I mean, if you look at what it would take in terms of GDP growth today to balance the budget, I just don't see that in the cards. Where's that going to come from? And as you probably well know, we're seeing, even though in the last quarter, we had 3.8%, a remarkable annualized GDP growth. But when you take all the spending, the CapEx on IT infrastructure, because of this AI-driven data center boom, it's more like 0.1%, that all of our growth is coming from this one sector. And that's risky and dangerous and not going to be the long-term situation.
Yeah, that's totally right. I think that, we might be lucky to get a couple years every once in a while of 3% growth, depending on what's going on in the economy. But we're not going to get sustained 3% growth. We're certainly not going to get 4% or 5% growth. We're much more likely to get, like I said, around 2%. And again, it's mostly about demographics. If we decided that we want suddenly something happened and we had another baby boom, maybe we could start talking about 3% again. But unless we decide we want more immigrants, which doesn't seem like that's going to be the case right now, or we have some massive productivity boom, maybe AI gets us a couple years of 3% growth, but it's probably not going to get us, decades of 3% growth.
Yeah, I think that's totally right. And so is this something you guys pay attention to as well, which is the birth rate that a lot of folks are sounding the alarm on? Elon Musk, you've seen him, about a year or so ago, said, maybe the biggest challenge facing our society, global society, is humans becoming extinct. Literally, he said that our birth rate is not at a level that is replacing natural attrition. I think in this country it's about 1.6. We need like 2.1 to keep up, and there doesn't seem to be an end to that trend.
Yeah, it's true. In pretty much all advanced economies, what we see is that the birth rate tends to go down as the countries get richer. It's a perplexing problem. It's a good question of what the federal government can do to kind of, encourage higher birth rates. We did see in the tax bill that passed over the summer that there was an increase in the child tax credit. Hopefully, that will start increasing the desire to want to have more children. But yes, it's a quandary that we're gonna be up against, and it's not easy to fix. There's just really not that many policy levers to pull to try to encourage people to have more children.
Well, one of the things that concerns me, and sometimes we may get criticized a little bit for it, but the people who can least afford a family are the ones that seem to be having the babies, and the people that can't afford it seem to understand I can't afford it, therefore they don't reproduce.
Yeah, I mean, it's perplexing, right? You would think that the people who had the most resources would want to have more children. And, especially as we're seeing people have maybe because they're having children later in life, maybe some of that technology will help improve the birth rate. But yeah, it's a huge challenge. And it's actually one of the reasons why Social Security is in such dire straits. We used to have
Absolutely.
16 people paying into the program for every beneficiary. Now it's about two people paying into the program for every one beneficiary. And unless we reverse that course, we're going to have to make changes to the program.
Yeah, we got to go, but I think when I researched those metrics, it was like 5 in the 60s, and now we're half of that. Less
Yeah,
than half of that.
exactly.
So, yeah. Chris Towner, Policy Director, Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget. Enjoy the discussion, Chris. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
We're stepping aside for a break. We got half an hour of middays remaining from the Element Wealth studio.